Well, good morning to you. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I'm gauging how much coffee you've already had by the volume of your response on that. Some of you need to go back and get more bean juice in you to be able to get that going. Listen, I appreciate Tim's introduction, but that either excites you that a youth pastor is in the Senate or terrifies you that a youth pastor is in the Senate. Depending on your relationship with your youth pastor on that, I do need to set you at ease now that he's already mentioned that, some of the background on it. I do not drive like the senator's van and pick everybody up in the morning. I don't bring pizza to every event. We do occasionally have lock-ins, but they're not lock-ins that I actually sponsor on that. So all that's not true. I have to tell you, it is an incredible joy to be able to serve in the United States Senate. But there was nothing like standing at Falls Creek and watching thousands of students come to Christ every single summer. When my wife and I sensed God's call, and it was a calling, what she calls life's greatest interruption, when we sensed a calling in 2008, 9, and 10 that just God would not leave us alone, we resigned our position at Falls Creek at the end of the summer of 2009 and spent a year living off our life savings, which, as you can imagine, in youth ministry was significant. And we lived off our life savings for a year, knowing that this is what God called us to do and to be able to take this on and to be able to be salt and light in a place. I had so many people that caught me immediately and said, DC is such a dark place. And I would typically smile at them and say, wouldn't it be odd of God to send light to a dark place? For all of us that have come here to be a part of this dialogue, we've not given up hope. We've said that God is still calling. He is still engaging. His affection still goes towards people. This morning, you may have had the same experience that I had. I won't say exactly because I don't know, but this morning when I got up and went into the bathroom and looked in the mirror, my immediate shock was the forces of good and evil had been raging a battle on my head, and evil had won, okay? And so hairs everywhere, and you just look at it, and you have this immediate response, like, I gotta get in the shower. I gotta, something's gotta be done on that. When we look in a mirror in the morning, we don't look in a mirror to see how bad it is and then walk away. We look in a mirror to see how bad it is and say, that needs work. And so I'm gonna do something about it. Some people look at Washington and say, that's bad, and walk away. Others look in the mirror and say, that's bad, I'm gonna do something about it. Listen, we're not of those people that look in the mirror and walk away. We're those people that look in the mirror and fix it. Now, I hate to tell you, Washington, D.C. is a mirror to the country. Now, we don't like to admit that, but we are a representative republic. That means the people that are serving us in Washington, D.C. are reflecting us and our values nationwide. And people look at Washington, D.C. and say it's a swampy, crazy anomaly. The rest of the country's not like that. The D.C.'s divided and angry and doing crazy stuff. And I say, how was it like at Thanksgiving at your house last year? When the whole family got together. And the whole family got together, and that one crazy cousin shows up in their crazy liberal T-shirt, and they start poking the other cousin who's like open carrying to Thanksgiving, and they just start going at it, and eventually the whole room either gets quiet or half the room leaves, and then you just talk about each other on the way home. You're laughing because it sounds familiar, doesn't it? We are as divided in D.C. as we are in the nation. We can look at that mirror that is D.C. and to say, that's not us. We can complain about that mirror that is D.C. and say, that looks terrible, and walk away. Or we can look in the mirror and go to work on it. I am honored to stand among a group of folks that is determined to do something about it and to find out what you can do in your own life, your own family, your own community to say we are going to shift to be able to do something different. Because we look in the mirror of our nation and we look at it and we see people celebrating abortion. This is the most pro-abortion president in the history of the country. He's turned VA clinics into abortion clinics. In my state, he's literally taken away the federal funding for AIDS testing and cancer screening in my state because my state won't put out a 1-800 number to every person in the state of where they can get an abortion. And so he's removed federal funding from us. We have a nurse in Vermont that said to her hospital, I came into healthcare to be able to protect life, not to be able to take it. And they said, we're going to honor that until this administration came. And this administration said, we're not going to defend you anymore. And literally, she was compelled to be a part of an abortion or lose her job. And this administration said, not my problem. Other than the fact it's federal law that she has conscience protections, but this administration said, we're just not going to guard this. We see people that literally look at a sonogram and see a child sucking its thumb, kicking its feet, and they say, that's medical waste. And we say, that's a child. One vote's not going to fix that. It's a culture that we're going to have to change. It's engagement with our neighbors, with our communities, with our families, to be able to say, let's say out loud what is obvious. When you look at a sonogram and see a nose and count 10 fingers and 10 toes, that's a baby. That's not a fetus. That's not medical tissue. That child has different DNA than every other person on the planet. It has different DNA than the mom or the dad. Every single cell in the mom's body has the exact same DNA from the toes to the nose, except those cells. Because what's different about those cells? Because it's a different person that's there. So we should speak the obvious to people that need to hear the obvious in love. We should speak the obvious to people that Israel is our ally and she needs to be defended and we need to stand with her. That should be obvious. When we watch activists scream from the river to the sea and talk about the annihilation of the Jewish nation, we should speak out for people. We should speak out and to say we've experienced in our own nation what terrorism looks like, and we're going to stand with those who are victims of terrorism as well. We should speak out in ways that convince and to move. We should speak out when 8 ISIS-affiliated individuals were arrested in America 2 weeks ago because President Biden had allowed them to come across our southern border openly. We should speak out on that. We should say that's not who we want to be. Listen, I've been very outspoken. I'm willing to work with anyone to be able to solve the issue of the border because I understand what's happening at our border. We have terrorists crossing every day. We have a 12-year-old murdered in Houston this week. We have a mom of 5 murdered in Maryland, who, by the way, that murderer also murdered in El Salvador, then actually committed a violent act in California, then murdered somebody in Maryland. And you know where they were arrested? My state. They were coming to my state to commit the next act of violence because President Biden allows thousands of people across the border every single day and says some of them are coming to work and some of them are coming to murder, but I don't have time to be able to filter between the two, so we'll just let them all in and figure it out later. That's not who we are. And we need to stop it right now. Right now. There are things that the president could do right now to be able to make a radical change. I understand full well this president doesn't want to enforce the border like President Trump did. President Trump had an incredibly secure border. He worked on everything that he possibly could to be able to bring the numbers down and to be able to enforce the border. But I've said to this president, at least enforce the border as much as President Obama did. President Obama had 500,000 people crossing a year. This president has 2.5 million people crossing a year that we know of. We've had 10 million people illegally cross the border in the last 3.5 years. That's more than the previous 12 years combined. If we don't get it stopped now, we're going to have another 2 million people illegally cross the border just between now and when President Trump comes in January. That's a problem. So for me, I'm going to work with whoever and whatever I can do. I'm on the floor of the Senate every week. I'm challenging it. I'm working with DHS in every way I can, because I don't want another 2 million people crossing into this country this year and wait for somebody else to be able to come in and fix it. Let's work to be able to fix it right now and to be able to get a stop to it. This is family. So let me speak family to us. We are people that are setting the tone for the nation. We are people that speak out on what's true and right. We say the obvious out loud, and we challenge people to better. That's why we're here. 2 Corinthians 5 says we have the ministry and the message of reconciliation. There's a broken world out there that doesn't need our anger. They need reconciliation. They need the opportunity to be able to know Christ and have their hearts transformed, and they need to see Christ alive in people and the difference that it's made. If we look, sound, act exactly like an angry leftist world, they'll see no difference. But if they see in us a joy, a peace, a direction that is right and that it is good, they'll see the imprint of Christ on the plan, and they'll know it's good and right. It's what Peter challenged in 1 Peter chapter 2, when he said, live such good lives among the pagans that though they may see your good deeds, they will glorify God on the day that he visits us. And then the very next verse after that is honor authority. And Peter says the first way that you can actually live such a good life among a lost world is to be able to speak about government and to government different than anyone else does. Because when you do that, you stand out and you have an opportunity to be able to transition hearts. It's what Paul challenged Titus in Titus chapter 3, to be able to live such a good life that we transform government and transform our culture by our life. If we are the angriest elves out there, people won't hear us. Christ had a pretty radical concept. He didn't come to be the angriest. He came to be the clearest. And he set a path, and people have been following him for 2,000 years and having a transformed life. We need to be able to set that path. Our reflection that we see in Washington, D.C., our reflection that we see in our nation is more than just a single election. And I appreciate Ralph's comments on that earlier. Isn't he such a great leader? Ralph does such a great job leading. I appreciate his comments earlier. We're working towards an election in November, and we're hoping and praying for great results there and a shift of what's happening in D.C. But I tell you, as we're working, we're also setting an example for the nation to say not only could it be different in Washington, D.C., it could be different in our lives and in our communities. We want to be able to transform a community in how we act and react. I go back over and over again in the Psalms of Ascent. Anytime I travel to Jerusalem, and I go as often as I can, anytime I get to Israel, as I'm approaching the city, I pull out Psalm 120 and start reading the Psalms of Ascent, just like the pilgrims did millennia ago. As I read the Psalms of Ascent, I always smile when I get to that second one, Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. When I get to that psalm, I always pause and remember when the pilgrims of old, when they were marching towards Jerusalem and they would see the city and start singing the Psalms of Ascent, as they looked up on the hill, they would see two huge buildings up on the hill. They would see the palace and they would see the temple. Those were the two massive buildings on the top of that hill. And as they approached the hill, they begin to sing, I lift up mine eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? And they're looking at God and government buildings in front of them. And they say, my help comes from the Lord, from that one, the maker of heaven and earth. Listen, when we set the example for the people around us, when we set what we need to do, be, when we set a reflection, we remind people again that when we lift up our eyes to the hill, we may see Capitol Hill, but Capitol Hill is not our hope. Capitol Hill is not our hope. It is our intention, it is our plan, it is our way to be able to help communicate to a nation that there's a better way to take care of our families and our communities, but our hope is not in Capitol Hill. Our hope is in the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. So my challenge to us today is look in the mirror, decide if you like what you see, and if you don't, Let's go to work fixing it. But let's be the example that we want the nation to be able to be. Let's lift up our eyes to the hills and know where our help comes from and call those behind us, come follow us as we follow him. Bless you in Jesus' name. Bless you.